Shalom there. I'm pastor and author Robert B. Scott of Freedom Church of God, and we're here on the Sabbath day, just before services, our Sabbath services, and I did get to do a switcheroo today. This man is a professional interviewer, and he interviews people like me and others for YouTube and for other reasons. But I get to switch around. I get to interview you today.
Yeah, what's that feeling like for you so far?
It feels good.
Yeah. You could be embarking on a whole new phase of your life.
Yeah. Exactly. So if I make any mistakes in interviewing, you can tell me. Okay.
I'll just storm off the set.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, Charlie. You know, you have not always kept the Sabbath day. You were a believer. You were into a Word of Faith church. You kept Sunday. What happened that you found out about the Sabbath? How did you find out, and what was your reaction? Was there any persecution, that kind of thing?
Well, yes, yes, and yes. Next question, please.
You're making it difficult for me. So you're supposed to fill in as the interviewee.
This is your initiation. Well, but seriously, yes, yes, and yes. Well, in following Jesus, and when I started to walk after His truth, there were certain things that I found in His Word that weren't lining up with the churches that I had been attending. So I started to read a little bit more, and I found out that, yeah, the Sabbath day is the day that God commands us to worship and fellowship and meet on that day. And at the time that I had met you, I was working with a radio station, a contemporary Christian radio station. And
would you like to rephrase that as a religious station, maybe?
Well, I was getting to that. Would you please stop interrupting me?
Thank you. That's tip number one.
An interviewer asks a question and then listens.
Okay.
In other words, I better hurry up and get there, right? Yeah, I did find out that a lot of radio stations that refer to themselves as Christian are in fact religious radio stations, because they observe all of the festivals, the holidays that the world does. But when I interviewed you, because Pastor Robert has written several books, and the one that we talked about on the radio was Why Doesn't God Heal Me? And Pastor Robert invited me to visit him at Freedom Church of God, which I have done and have continued to do for the last 6 or 7 years. But once I stepped out in the truth of God's Word about the Sabbath and the truth of God's Word in general, oh yeah, lots of persecution, even from my former employers.
Is that where you lost your hair? No, that wasn't.
No, that's a long other story that we don't have time for. I'll tell it another time. But once I started speaking out truth of God's Word, I was told by my former contemporary Christian radio employers that I shouldn't be compromising what they were expecting. And what they were expecting me to do was not follow the truth of God's Word. So, long story short, I'm no longer employed by them. And the change in my life, although I went through a time of testing, it was for growth, because, yeah, I stood up and I spoke out God's truth and was persecuted for it, lost a job for it. However, I've gained a life for it, and I've gained more peace in my life than I have ever had before. And I know that's because I am walking in the truth of God's Word and observing the Sabbath.
Well, that's a beautiful testimony, Charlie, and we thank you for that. Now, you did face some persecution. You didn't get scalped, but you did face persecution. But you know, it does give you peace, because when you do what God says is right, you know in your heart you're doing right. And He says, rejoice. When people criticize you and persecute, He says, I am the same way. They hated me, they'll hate you. But rejoice in it, because your Father in heaven is very happy with you. He's happy with you, Charlie, and we're happy to say God bless you, Jesus bless you in all your ways.